On the 29th of January 2000, Andy D'Urso awarded a penalty. From the extreme reaction, you might be expecting a bad error from an inexperienced referee. In reality, Jaap Stam was lucky to escape a red card. Perhaps what you're seeing is best described as disbelief, as when you start leafing back through the history books, you realise that this was the first penalty given against Manchester United at home domestically for 6 years. It's easy to see where this leads, as it's nearly impossible to untangle these United sides from their leader, Sir Alex Ferguson. 38 trophies with the club in 26 years, which will never be matched for as long as I live. But because of my age when I was watching them, and my club allegiance growing up, there's always that nagging voice in the back of my mind. The questionable calls, the spectre of Fergie time, how much of their success was down to their football and their elite mentality, and how much of it was down to the darker arts they employed. If you clicked on this video, like me, you probably have your own gut reaction to that question, swinging wildly between two extremes, and it's so hard to remove that personal bias from the evaluation. But this penalty record, on the other hand, gives me something more concrete. Were there really 6 years of legitimate, penalty-free football played at Old Trafford during this time period?
This is a player, even although he annoyed me.
The 1993-94 FA Carling Premiership season was won at a canter by Manchester United, propelled by the signing of Roy Keane for a whopping new record English transfer fee of £3.75 million from Nottingham Forest. We need to start by looking at a 2-2 draw between Manchester United and Norwich on a cool, crisp December afternoon. Ironically, the penalty that bookends our study was a bit on the soft side, as Chris Sutton, with his surprisingly modern looking fade cut, chased onto a perfectly weighted through ball and went down under pressure from United's Gary Pallister. It's a little bit hard to make out exactly what is happening in regards to various limbs, with the limited quality of the earlier Premier League footage, although that will be improving as we go on. There's probably some form of contact. I think I can make out Pallister's arm extending out slightly into Sutton's back, yet I've definitely seen defenders get away with similar challenges back in the day. Pallister makes an attempt to complain to the officials, one that the future Manchester United side would be absolutely ashamed of, and the penalty was dispatched as Norwich managed to grab a draw to go along with the last penalty that would be awarded to the opposition at Old Trafford for the next 6 years. When I started this project, I thought it would be relatively easy. Just read the BBC match reports for the United home games between the 4th of December 1993 and the 29th of January 2000, and then take note of any penalty appeals which were brought up in the match reports. I was very wrong for a number of reasons. First of all, the BBC didn't even have a website until 1997, with written match reports only starting to be pushed out in the back half of 1998, which doesn't even cover a third of the necessary timeline. The next plan was to go and find some kind of archive of old match of the days and watch the highlights of each United game. I look forward to being surrounded by the comforting, dulcet tones of Des Lynam and Alan Hansen, but sadly, these were far too sparse, both in their availability and in the fact that older Match of the Day episodes often only showed the goals rather than a full highlights package, so I had to do the legwork myself. I stupidly went to the library to try and access the archives like I was Nicolas Cage or something, but then they told me that you could just look at old newspapers online with a subscription. So I read through the sports pages of the British broadsheets from the comfort of my desk, taking papers from the day after every Manchester United home game, then scouring them for any mention of controversy. And I paid $20 for the pleasure, making this the first YouTube video I'll ever make a loss on. Hooray for forgetting to cancel the free trial. On the plus side, I got to really dive back into the progression of this United side as it morphed throughout the 90s into a team that I personally remember. An enjoyable history lesson, a trip down memory lane, and a chance to read back through some really surprisingly good football journalism, all rolled into one. So, just a month after that first game against Norwich, we were back, with not one, not two, but 3 penalty appeals in one game. A 5th round League Cup clash versus Portsmouth, which ended in a 2-2 draw, leading to a replay that Manchester United would eventually win en route to the final. Fullback Paul Parker makes what could be generously described as an agricultural challenge on the Portsmouth man, Alan McLaughlin, on the edge of the box, and somehow gets away with it. The other two appeals, on the other hand, are less clear, as despite all of my online sleuthing, I was unable to find any footage of the other two appeals in the match. And trust me, I've become an expert at scouring the web for random Manchester United football clips. Did you know the Russian for Manchester United is
Manchester United?
I do have footage of the Portsmouth manager at the time, Jim Smith, claiming that they should have had 3.
Cancelled out by 3 very dodgy decisions or non-decisions by the referee on a handball on 2 trips.
So 1 stonewall shout and 2 unknown potential appeals. Thankfully, this issue with finding footage of appeals is mostly confined to this game and a couple from the earlier years of the run. I'll go over how I'll be categorising these appeals, but for now, we'll look at the last one that I could find from the 93-94 season. And it's a bit of a bizarre one, a flash forward in time to when VAR would be implemented some 30 years later. A penalty is actually originally given as 2 players go down in a heap in the United box. But then, the referee runs over to the far side of the pitch to have a consultation with his linesman before awarding a free kick out to Manchester United. I'm struggling to see how this one was overturned. From the footage, it certainly looks like the referee, who is standing about 20 yards away, has a much better view than the linesman on the other side of the pitch. The only explanation I can come up with is that the Liverpool attacker has his goal side arm wrapped around the defender and then drags them both down, which only the linesman would have been able to see. The footage certainly makes it look like a penalty, and once it's given, you don't expect it to be overturned from the other side of the pitch. The lack of protest from a United team, who certainly weren't shy of doing so, is another reason for me leaning towards it being a penalty. So that's 4 appeals against United at home over half of the season. As we go along, I'm going to be awarding each penalty an unofficial penalty percentage score to help us keep track. I deliberated for a long time over what to do with the penalties I didn't have footage for. I considered going through all of the match reports I could find, and judging based on how the authors described the incidents as to how likely it seemed that they were actually fouls, but a lot of the reports are very non-committal, written to a tight deadline, and pretty off on the details when I am able to find footage. So what I'm going to do instead is be generous to Man United, and for every penalty that I don't have footage of, I'll award them the lowest percentage that I gave to any penalty incident that I have video footage of. A cheap little script writing trick, which will help me to build up a little suspense for the final figure. I also asked my brother, a qualified referee in the year 2026, to give me a second opinion on the incidents while keeping the difference of eras in mind. Well-qualified opinions in my video essays? I'll be throwing his grades up on screen as we go along.
They got him sent off. Everyone sprinted towards the referee. Typical Germans.
The 1994-95 season was the last in Premier League history to have 22 teams. 4 teams would be relegated for the last time in order to reduce the league down to 20. Blackburn broke the transfer record to sign Chris Sutton of all people for £5 million, the ex-Norwich player who was originally fouled to start our story off, only to then be gazumped by Manchester United, who splashed £6 million on Andy Cole in January. It's lucky that they did, because later that same month, Cantona performed the most famous piece of karate to take place on English soil and copped a suspension for the whole season. Blackburn, with their new signing and his strike partner Alan Shearer, would go on to win the league. And as predictably as a piece of Alan Shearer's punditry, Manchester United would once again not concede any penalties at Old Trafford. The season brought 3 more penalty appeals that I could find. One in a close 1-0 win in December against Norwich, who may also have had a legitimate goal ruled out for offside in the same game. The other, a handball preventing Homes Under the Hammer legend Dion Dublin from having a chance to put the ball in the back of the net. The lone appeal with video footage is this potential shout for Southampton near the end of the season, as United look to keep their faint title hopes alive. I think you can just about see Schmeichel getting his hands on the ball from this angle, but Southampton probably felt slightly aggrieved considering that United were awarded a fairly soft penalty at the other end in the same game. The Guardian match report suggested the next day that Andy Cole, whose girlfriend had just had a baby, should consider calling him Paul after the referee.
The only one they've left to is Barack Obama. He's too busy.
United would perform addition by subtraction in the transfer window before the 1995-96 season, shipping off big names such as Paul Ince, Mark Hughes and Andrei Kanchelskis for big fees. The Kanchelskis transfer in particular was remarkable, as it was seemingly one domino in a line of events which led to the fatal bombing of the Shakhtar Donetsk president Alexander Bragin and 5 of his bodyguards soon afterwards.
And I think you have to look at his agent and say, this is real heavy stuff, this. I mean, some of the meetings with him, the chairman and I, it's incredible.
Example?
Real Godfather stuff.
Meanwhile, Everton, Liverpool, Tottenham, Arsenal, Middlesbrough and Newcastle would all make individual transfers in which they paid more than the £6 million United had paid for Andy Cole in January, while Ferguson would lean on the mix of experience left in his squad along with his now infamous group of youngsters to win the league despite the cash splashed everywhere else, much to Alan Hanson's chagrin.
You can't win anything with kids.
This was the emergence of players like Scholes, Beckham and the Neville brothers. What did not emerge, however, were any penalties for the opposition, as I trawled through the back pages of a third season in my bizarre search. There was penalty drama on Cantona's return from suspension against rivals Liverpool, as Robbie Fowler was perhaps unfortunate not to get a penalty, as Steve Bruce clumsily bundled him over as he was breaking through. Especially when you consider the fact that United received a similar call in their favour at the other end, when Ryan Giggs went down quicker than when left alone in a room with his brother's wife. Ultimately, looking at it from all available angles, I don't mind the no call on the Liverpool appeal. There was another soft appeal for Liverpool when McManaman went down under some attention from Roy Keane, but that one was an even weaker claim. Having gone through 7 years of match reports, I'd be remiss not to mention that Manchester United's march to their third FA Cup under Alex Ferguson contained 2 of the worst calls that I saw throughout my whole search, even if they weren't penalty appeals. I'd made it a habit as I went through the papers to take note of any refereeing controversies and to give them a quick look if I could find the highlights. The FA Cup games are better archived than the random Premier League fixtures, so they were always the easiest to find. In the 5th round this year, they were losing, in a very surprising fashion, to massive underdogs and their noisy neighbours, Man City, until this call was given for what, I'm not sure. It truly is hard to see who he's even thought he could call a penalty against here. It's also interesting to note that the referee in this game is Alan Wilkie, the same ref who sent Cantona off for a kick on Richard Shaw before he launched himself feet first into the stands, which had led to Alex Ferguson having to be dragged out of the referee's dressing room by a policeman in order to end a torrent of abuse towards Wilkie, with Ferguson being quoted in part as saying, "It's all your fucking fault. If you'd done your fucking job, this wouldn't have happened." Which is an interesting way of assigning blame when your player has karate kicked a fan, regardless of his refereeing performance. Wilkie is now vice chairman at Northern League Division 2 club Chester Lee Street, and they put up this interview with him as a way to promote the release of his book, in which he says,
Sir Alex Ferguson in particular, a more charming and amenable person, and I mean giving, you couldn't wish to meet, away from the touchline.
So that incident clearly didn't sour him on Alex Ferguson too much. Did his tirade pressure him in terms of his decision making at Old Trafford just a year later? Well, we'll never know, but it's an interesting link given the call. In the roughly 2 years between writing the guts of this script and eventually getting around to recording and editing it in full, I happened to stumble across an interview with Niall Quinn randomly playing on the TV, and in it he was talking about a penalty incident, not in the context of Alex Ferguson, but of Roy Keane.
The referee, "That's a terrible decision, how dare you give a decision like that?" And the referee said to him, "Roy, I haven't, it's a penalty for you."
And I was basically jumping out of my chair in instant recognition of the penalty in question from my research. And you can see the near comical reaction of Keane on the video to show that Alan Quinn was not making this penalty up. Then in the very next round, Southampton had a goal ruled out in a fashion which was nearly as absurd. Although on this one, I can at least fathom what the referee was pretending to have seen, as he called a foul against the attacker who had leapt like a salmon, even if you can see that there is no infringement upon watching the replays of the incident. But to bring things back on topic, these were the only appeals I could find for a relatively uneventful year in the Manchester United penalty area at Old Trafford. In fact, I only found one penalty appeal listed in the newspaper reports for this year. The only reason I was able to find that second, very weak appeal for Liverpool in that game, was that it was one of the only games I could find a complete recording of in my research. So on this occasion, I was able to indulge and just let the match play through for a bit, listening to a young Ali McCoist sitting beside Martin Tyler back when he could still muster up some enthusiasm, while getting to watch Jamie Redknapp sans his fancy Skechers slip-ons, you don't even have to bend over to put them on, you know, elegantly gliding around the middle of the pitch. Thanks to this luxury, I was able to hear a throwaway line.
Now Liverpool will think they've been denied twice.
And I was able to scrub back through the footage and find the admittedly weak appeal. This gave me a bit of an existential crisis. If the game wasn't close enough for the appeal to matter, or if it simply wasn't picked up upon by the journalist, then I was out of luck. Ultimately, there wasn't a lot I could do about this fact, without a lot more spare time and access to an archive of full Premier League games that is currently unattainable, so instead I soothed my brain by reminding myself that the appeals not mentioned in the newspaper reports were far more likely to be the more outlandish shouts, like the second one I had logged in this Liverpool game. On the other hand, all of these small little shouts add up, and in the same way that a referee might miss an obvious penalty because of a bad angle or misjudgment, you might also expect a team to get a really soft penalty for the same reasons. It's not unreasonable to think there might be 10 or 15 appeals of that kind that appears in the Liverpool game a season which are not mentioned in the reports, which would add up to an extra 90 or so over the timeline that we're looking at in this video.
A fucking disgrace. It doesn't mean it's his fucking right.
1996-97 was the same old for Manchester United as they held on to the title. Some signings, such as that of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, were better than others, with Johan Cruyff's son, Jordi Cruyff, failing to make an impact for the Red Devils. The Champions League continued to elude Alex Ferguson's team, as did the feeling of having the referee making the forbidden signal at Old Trafford of pointing to the penalty spot. We do have to go all the way to the new year to find our first substantial appeal, and it's one of the most clear-cut penalty shouts of this whole exercise, helped in part by the fact we're starting to get into the era of video that consists of more than 10 pixels on show at a time. Referee David Elleray somehow found a way to award a corner kick from this clumsy challenge by Roy Keane on Milicevic, somewhat impressively making it a wrong decision on two fronts, as it was clearly kicked out of play by the Aston Villa player. There's a great feeling of resignation in the reactions of the Manchester United players when this challenge goes in, only for them to all turn around and see the referee pointing towards the corner flag instead, with future Manchester United man Dwight Yorke leading the protests towards the referee. The second major appeal of the year was of limited importance, as United had already locked up the league late in the season. It's a bit of a weird one too, as Shearer pokes the ball out of the grasp of Schmeichel and admittedly out of the danger area before Schmeichel sort of just swings a leg at him. This strikes me as one of those ones that would never have been given, even if technically it should be a penalty by the letter of the law. And with that, we reached the halfway point of our timeline. I mentioned at the start how much I enjoyed the research for this video. Flicking through a set of Premier League seasons, week by week, was a great way of diving deeper into a set of seasons I was aware of, but that were quite simply before my time, with the sports reporting being a genuinely big deal, and journalism being in a much better place. The match reports were often just very enjoyable pieces of writing, with great turns of phrases, highbrow cultural references, and evocative descriptions of events. There were also frequent reminders of the times before the full advent of political correctness, with the paper rebroadcasting the rather crude taunts of West Ham fans towards David Beckham, with shouts of "Posh Spice is a dirty slag," perhaps even more out of pocket given it's the words of a regular old journalist, rather than a reprint of the taunts of jeering fans, are the scathing words in the Observer for legendary Ghanaian striker Tony Yeboah, who they said was overweight and out of condition, rarely beat his man or the offside trap, and that Nicky Butt would be grateful the Ghanaian only kicked him and had not rolled on top of him. It wasn't just the fans and the reporters though, as Ferguson was happy to speak his mind plenty in a time before the managers knew the meaning of the phrase media trained, blaming the milkman for Neville being vertically challenged, taking plenty of shots at referees, and having a great exchange with Andy Gray, who made it clear where he stands on the debate that we're trying to settle here today, as he put it out there that it is an unescapable fact that visitors do not get as much as they should at Old Trafford. Ferguson didn't mince his words with his response, stating that Andy Gray is talking crap when he suggests we would have got a penalty if it had been at the other end, and he has the nerve to say he's not anti-Manchester United. Alex, if you're watching, I'd just like you to know that I'm not anti-Manchester United. I just want to talk about facts.
Arsene Wenger's been in Japan for a year. He doesn't know anything about English football.
The French Revolution took effect in 1997-98, with Arsene Wenger's Arsenal taking the title ahead of a Manchester United team who struggled to overcome the loss of Eric Cantona. Arsenal won a record 10 games in a row to canter to their first league title in 7 years. Michael Owen was the top scorer in the league, although he is probably best known in his career for terrorising Jamie in the 1999 VHS tape Michael Owen's Soccer Skills. Jamie would have saved the same amount of penalties for Manchester United as Peter Schmeichel did at Old Trafford this season, as United survived another year without conceding a penalty at home. God, these segues are getting bad. The second home game of the season had an appeal for a consolation penalty for an infringement on Dion Dublin, although understandably, with the score sitting at 3-0, there wasn't a rush to put this onto the highlights for the routine United win. A far more consequential decision came in the 5th round of the FA Cup, as United and Barnsley were deadlocked, the score 1-1 going into the dying minutes. The ball worked around the edge of the box nicely before being poked through to winger Andy Liddell, who was then unceremoniously scythed down by Gary Neville with the old chop across the knees. Meanwhile, Mike Riley, who seemed to have a decent view of the ball during the incident, remained unmoved. Remarkably, despite missing out on a chance to end the tie then and there, Barnsley were able to run it back and win the replay 3-2 at home, despite propping up the bottom of the table at the time. Just a month later, it was a key clash at Old Trafford as Arsenal came into town. Even though some of the bookies had already paid out on United winning the title, Arsenal had been on a charge and were breathing down United's necks. On this occasion, it was Mark Overmars being felled by the young English right-back John Curtis, with our old friend Alan Wilkie being on hand to turn this one down once again. They were still able to come away from Old Trafford as 1-0 winners, a winning goal from the same man Mark Overmars, who had spent the day tearing the United defence to shreds. The win would propel Arsenal on their way to being eventual champions, with Martin Keown marking this as the day that Arsenal players knew that they'd win the league. My favourite part of going through the papers wasn't the incredible quote sections or the quaint reminders of a time gone by, but the fantastic pieces of sports photography that you'd be blessed with each and every week. Sleep paralysis David Beckham and this photo of Fergie with his head in his hands are particular favourites. I'm not really an AI guy, as you can probably tell by my terrible homemade graphics, but it was my understanding that one of the things they're pretty good at is retouching old photos, so I thought it might be worth firing through a couple to see what they'd come out as and if they could maybe be used in this video. I'm not sure if I picked a bad model or what, but I had to abandon those plans pretty quickly.
Can't believe it. Football, bloody hell.
You need no introduction to Manchester United's 1998-99 season. You know it, I know it, that's right. It's Manchester United's 5th consecutive season without conceding a penalty at their home ground domestically. You'll never sing that. And I guess a treble, which also included a double in injury time to get the elusive Champions League win that Ferguson had been chasing for years. The signing of centre-back Jaap Stam for just over £10 million and Dwight York for £12.5 million helped propel them to success, but it's said that Fergie would always regret these signings, as they would eventually lead to the downfall of their illustrious and world-renowned penalty streak. The first appeal came against Newcastle in a drab 0-0 draw, the only game in which they managed to fail to score at home all season. Dennis Irwin with a body check after the Newcastle forward had rounded the keeper, challenge which falls firmly into the category of I've seen them given. It was easier to get away with a clumsy challenge like this, especially running away from the danger area with the ball heading out wide. We then had our final appeal that remained undocumented on film, as a late appeal for Forest in a 2-1 loss in the 4th round of the League Cup was turned down. Then one of the most potentially consequential decisions from our whole little study here, the penultimate game in the league for United at home to Villa. A game in which Schmeichel could have been sent off for handling the ball outside of the area, and in which Manchester United were given an extremely questionable penalty, which they then proceeded to miss. But most importantly for us, this foul on the very edge of the box was given, rather strangely, as an indirect free kick for obstruction. It looks like the free kick was spotted just outside of the area as well, so it was double ruled by the referee as not being a penalty. But it's a damn close thing when you look at the replay. United would go on to win the league by a solitary point, a lead which could have been erased if the referee had made a couple of different decisions on the day. And in the post-match interview, Aston Villa manager John Gregory had a great quote in which he again commented on the topic of our video.
I was asking the steward actually when the last time Manchester United actually were conceded a penalty at home in a Premiership game. I think it's black and white photos, Tony. I think you were in shorts at the time.
Maybe someone can send this one on to him so he can finally have his full, in-depth answer.
And to go chasing the referee out, to be fair, if he stood still, to be fair, I don't think we would have chased him. It's just...
The change of the millennium brought no change in results for Manchester United, as they would again go on to win the league. They managed to overcome dropping what was at the time a huge sum of £4.5 million on a goalkeeper, Massimo Taibi, who ended up being a massive flop, being given the nickname of the Blind Venetian by the British tabloids. United skipped their defence of the FA Cup to compete in the first ever FIFA Club World Championship in Brazil in January 2000, marking the first true games gone moment of the new millennium. And the end of our journey came with that fateful call by Andy D'Urso on the 29th of January 2000, just after Manchester United had returned from Brazil. The foul itself, well, we've definitely seen worse over the past 6 years. It's touch and go as to what happens first, the ball or the man, and my take changes depending on the angle. There's one that looks like a slam dunk pen, and then one that looks like he takes the ball just before he cleans out the man. But once the penalty had been given, all we're really here for is the reaction, right? And I thought I'd be able to get a great piece of footage, as between the time of me writing the guts of this script and the video coming out, the Premier League released a section on their website, rather questionably called The Archive. Now the reaction for this penalty call has become a rather iconic image for a number of players and of the Fergie era in general. It's an incident that when talked about on a podcast 25 years later, gets millions of views and is regularly brought up and posted in footballing circles all across the internet. Well, their 20-minute highlight package of the game rather laughably shows Juninho breaking through on goal, the foul, a couple of seconds of Beckham starting the chase which would eventually end up near the corner flag, and a cut to a replay of the incident from behind, before we get to see Juninho stepping up to the spot with the ball in his hand. You're trying to tell me that there's 19 minutes of more important footage to show from this game over the reaction? And that's before even mentioning the fact that they didn't bother to show the live footage of the earlier red card that Middlesbrough had picked up, instead cutting straight to the referee handing out the second yellow card. I'd love to get a hold of whoever cuts these highlights together, if it's not some sort of AI-led extraction of shots on goals and major incidents, to get an idea of what they were thinking, or what they were told to do with some of these editing decisions. This is meant to be like the main archive of the Premier League, and if your son or someone wants to go back and learn about it, they just miss half of the important bits. Like, it kills me how bad it is. So instead, here's the highest quality footage that we have of the reaction to the call, with Yapstam and Roy Keane on the charge, and with the young ref perhaps not quite realising how monumental of a call that he'd made. Ironically, after 6 years of build-up, Juninho had to go and miss the penalty after all of that, creating a wholly unsatisfying end to the remarkable run of refereeing decisions at Old Trafford. Andy D'Urso said his reason for backing all the way to the corner flag was that he feared being pushed over. Hardly in front of 60,000 witnesses was Ferguson's remarkably nonchalant response. Alex Ferguson continued to show his outstanding way with words after the fact, saying, "I couldn't see the instant which led to the penalty from where I was, but the way the players reacted showed they didn't think it was a penalty," managing to put a little pressure on the referee without even having to take a stance himself. When I started this little exercise, I was kind of expecting this to be somewhat of a debunking of the myth around Alex Ferguson and his influence on referees. I was primed by the comparatively nonsensical, constant complaints of the modern day fan about PG and Mall conspiracies to think that something roughly equivalent had happened in the past, fueled out of frustration from a team who just kept winning and winning and winning, in the same way that my intense playground rivalries with the Manchester United fans around me growing up have fueled my dislike for United for many years after they were particularly relevant at the top of the table. But now that I have all of the appeals that I could find in front of me, well, it's hard not to look at it and say that there was some genuine bias in the refereeing, despite my hopes and expectations coming in to making the video. Some rough back of the napkin math with my given percentages, while assigning the lowest chance to the appeals I didn't see, gives astronomically small odds of every decision going that way simply by chance, at 0.00002 or 0.02% rounded up, roughly speaking. I know there are definitely some flaws in my workings out from a professional statistician's point of view. You'd have to go into a whole thing, and I can see the counter-argument pretty clearly too. The next closest club in terms of penalty conceded at home is West Ham with 4, and if you expand out the time period in question by 2 days, then United have 2 penalties awarded against them, and it's not that far off from West Ham after all. They were also consistently the best team in the league, no matter what you think of the refereeing over that time period. So with access to modern day stats, you might be able to prove that the opposition had less touches in the box to earn penalties, and thus with a bit of variance, it's not that outlandish that United fared so much better in terms of penalties conceded. To throw another spanner in the works, there were actually penalties awarded at Old Trafford during this time span. You may have noted that I've been very careful to mention they've had no penalties awarded at home domestically as I've gone through the script. That's because European referees awarded 3 penalties at Old Trafford in this time span, in just a fraction of the games. There were 2 given on the 16th of September 1998 against Barcelona, both pretty much deserved in my book, although Ferguson was happy to label it as a disgrace in his post-match comments, despite Barcelona also having a goal ruled out for a questionable offside. The third came in a 2-1 win at home over Sturm Graz on the 2nd of November 1999. Whether you want to argue this as proof that Fergie had no special treatment and the random distribution of penalties simply happened to place them into these European fixtures instead of their domestic ones, or if you use it to show that Ferguson had a vice grip on English referees who wouldn't dare to rule against him, well again, I suspect that will have a lot to do with what you were already thinking about the man before you clicked on this video. But you're watching my video, so I can just tell you what to think, and you have to listen to me. And I think it's significant that the refs from a different jurisdiction, who are therefore less likely to be intimidated or influenced by the all-encompassing personality that is Alex Ferguson, gave so many penalties in such a relatively small amount of games. So to answer the question I set out to solve, did Manchester United get favourable treatment from the refs on penalty decisions at home during this time period? It's a categorical yes from me. The more interesting question might be whether or not Ferguson did anything wrong in how he treated the refs and how he handled the media. After all, it's not technically his fault if the referees give him favourable decisions. That's bad refereeing. Was he stepping outside of the scope of what other managers were doing at the time, or was he simply better at manipulating it? Because while it might be a slightly controversial opinion, I'm completely down for the mind games that come with being a manager. Whether that's some sly post-match comments about the referee to put some pressure on, or manipulating and directing the press in order to make the headlines what you want them to be, is something that literally every manager in the Premier League partakes in, whether or not they admit it. Probably one of the most important and underrated skills a manager can have, especially for those in charge of the big sides. And when you look at how Ferguson would handle the media, it's hard not to see every single interaction as an attempt to exert a level of control. There's this remarkable clip where he looks like some kind of school principal talking to some unruly students when he's addressing the media and the stories that they were printing.
Well, first of all, I just want to address you people in front of me, the dailies. I had some of these banned for a few weeks, and to be honest, I get fed up with it. Your job is to tell the truth, right? That's your job.
His refusal to be interviewed by the BBC for years after releasing a documentary about his son Jason, who was working as an agent at the time, or being caught in a hot mic asking his press officer to ban a journalist after they asked a fairly nondescript question about Ryan Giggs in the aftermath of his affair and the press coverage around it. He'd operate both the carrot and stick in plain view of the media in order to get his message out, whether that was with the media themselves or in his statements to them addressing the refereeing of his games. You can see it in the reaction to the Andy D'Urso incident, with Stam, Keane and Ferguson all coming out and apologising for pushing things a little too far, seemingly owning up to their mistakes, but they all made sure to reiterate that the referee had made a bad call within the same apology, saying that the first penalty given against them in 6 years should never have been called. I was nearly laughing out loud at the audacity of Ferguson's statements as he managed to deflect the attention away from his team's reaction, criticising the media coverage in the aftermath. I saw an incident in the game at Chelsea between Chelsea and Leicester yesterday when a player went right over the ball, he said, of Dennis Wise's tackle on Steve Walsh, and it didn't get a fraction of the headlines of what happened in our game. So you have to wonder, what is more serious? A career-threatening tackle, or to abuse the ref? If he wasn't a top-tier manager, he could have made an absolute fortune as a lawyer, or as head of a PR firm. You can't even necessarily disagree with what he said or how he said it. It's just masterful deflection and media handling all around. That's when you get into the question and a whole other mess around considering whether or not he crossed certain lines and what was going on behind the scenes. But we're probably never going to be able to get enough information to get a clear picture on that front. It's better to focus on what you can actually take a more concrete look at anyway, for your own sanity. From an in-depth look at the appeals at Old Trafford during the time period, I think it's pretty clear there was something going on with the refereeing. This quote from Paolo Di Canio's autobiography sums things up pretty nicely. To get a penalty at Old Trafford, someone needs to take out a machine gun and riddle you full of bullets. And even then, there would be a debate about whether you were shot inside the area or just outside. Or maybe he was just taken out of context. Who knows with that man? Now all we need is for someone else to do this with Fergie time and we're sorted. All I'm saying is it won't be me.